Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of my series where I create my own dream game in Godot. If you haven't seen the latest episode where I went over how I created a working inventory for a player, I highly recommend checking out this video first. Last time I teased that I would finally add enemies to the game, and today I did exactly that. I decided to start with slimes. They're simple, easy to program, and a great way to learn the basics of enemy behavior. Of course, later on, I'll introduce more complex enemies with different attack patterns, but for now, slimes will do the job. But wait, there's a small problem, or rather a big problem. The player can't even attack yet. So, back into Esprite I went, creating some basic attack animations for the player. After a few tests, I got them working. Now, when the player swings their sword, you can see the animation play out. I've also added the slime already into the scene, but now let's make the slime actually chase the player. How does the slime know where to go? It's actually pretty simple. It's one line of code. All it does is it calculates the difference between its own position and the player's position. Using that, it knows how much to move in the X and Y directions. Finally, I divided this value by its speed, which I can tweak to make it move faster or slower. As you can also see from this image, depending on if the player is to the right or to the left of the slime, it will flip the animation horizontally, or it will just keep it as it is. And if the player is not being chased, then it will just remain in his idle animation. Here you can see it in action. The slime starts moving towards the player when it gets close enough. Next, I added damage mechanics. When the slime gets hit by the sword, it takes damage and eventually dies. But wait, why is it dropping a stone? Oops, silly me. I forgot to assign the right loot. And I haven't even created loot for the slimes. So back into Esprite I went, quickly drawing a slime spatter to replace the placeholder stone. But it wasn't just simply drawing something in Esprite. I also had to create a new resource, implement that into my game, and change that the slime actually drops this new resource. I then in Godot had to select what part of this PNG file it has to display, and so on. But shortly after, I finally fixed it, and now it drops a slime spatter instead of a stone. Now, when a slime is defeated, it correctly drops a slime related item. At this point, something fell off. Hitting an enemy just didn't feel satisfying. And I've been wondering why that is. And then it finally got to me. In many games, enemies flash white for a split second when hit. This gives a player immediate feedback that their attack landed. So I implemented a simple shader to make enemies and the player flash white when they take damage. Now combat feels way more responsive, and you actually know when you're taking damage or dealing damage. But still, it didn't feel right. I didn't want just one slime sitting around waiting to be killed. Instead, I wanted the player to enter areas where slimes naturally spawn over time. So I created a slime spawner that spawns a new slime every few seconds. However, to prevent things from getting out of hand, I set a limit of 5 slimes at a time. That means a new slime will only spawn when another one is defeated. Here's the final test. You can see slimes spawning with a slight variation in position to make it feel more natural. The spawner spawns 5 slimes, and only after defeating one of the other slimes, it will spawn a new one. With this slime spawner working and the player being able to fight new slimes, I've now implemented all core gameplay mechanics. We have a player that can walk and has some basic movement. He can farm items such as rocks and trees. We just introduced enemy combat into the game. The player has also a working inventory, and we also created machines, if you remember, that can passively farm items such as rocks or trees for the player. So what are the next steps? Well, I want to create a proper environment with better grass, water, and in general better scenery to get rid of this ugly scenery that we have right now. I also want to work on my first proper environments like an underground cave where the player can fight those slimes that we just created. And maybe if I have time, I'll even introduce our first NPC already, which can give the player some quests. So we will introduce actual gameplay and game lore into our game. And of course, as always, fix bugs that come along the way. That's it for this week's episode. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what features you'd love to see next. If you missed any of the previous episodes, make sure to go to my channel and check them out. See you in the next week.